Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being a part of C12Arkansas and for making the trip to the Winthrop Rockefeller Institute here on Petit Jean Mountain. We are so excited you're here. You get worship from Daryl. You get a story from the Hope family and what they're doing at Powers of Arkansas. And this crazy thing we talk about as business as ministry, where it all gets infused and integrated together. And we have the opportunity to live that out Monday through Friday and Saturday all week long. It is an incredible, incredible thing. We know that C12 is transformational to the life of a business owner. So we're excited for you to be here tonight. Got a couple of things we have planned for you. I want to also thank our sponsors. Corporate Chaplains of America had a big role in paying for, I guess is what I'm trying to say, paying for the dinner tonight, being a part of that. And the kingdom life that brings joy and peace everywhere we go. I hope you feel that and can sense that in what we're doing here together and how we live that out. And so many of you have contributed to this process as well, and we thank you and just love seeing that growing tribe of world changers that you are living this out. And I know some of you, particularly the spouses, have been asking all this time we've been planning this event is like, now why do I need to be there? What are we doing? What's going on? And I hope tonight you will get the opportunity to see the bigger kingdom picture of what we're doing with this business as ministry. We always talk about equipping Christian CEOs and owners to build great businesses for a greater purpose. And so that gets talked about a lot. Do you know the vision statement, the vision behind C12 is to change the world by advancing the gospel in the marketplace? Then that's what we get to do together. And so when we brought C12 to Arkansas, it's been about 3.5 years ago, and I was just telling Stephen Oaf just a minute ago, I think Stephen was one of 2 people in Arkansas that had actually ever heard of C12. Everybody else was like, what in the world is C12? Dee, did you start this thing? Have you lost your mind? What's going on? What's the bigger story about C12? And here we are tonight, 3.5 years later, with this opportunity to let everybody kind of see each other, members, key players, spouses, and get the bigger picture of what we're up to. So thank you for being here tonight. And I'm excited to get the opportunity to introduce my good friend, Mike Sharrow. Couple of fast facts about Mike. He's probably going to poke the bear tonight. I'm just going to prep you for that. It's going to be fun to hear Mike speak. Let me tell you a little bit about Mike. He grew up in Alaska. You'll hear that from time to time. Worked in Chicago at Walgreens and then owned a healthcare company that contributed or consulted to some Fortune 50 companies. Met his wife, Jackie, from the Midwest, and they have 2 lovely daughters, Elena and Sophia. Made their home in San Antonio, Texas, so all the way to the south now. Mike also served as an executive pastor for a large church in Central Texas. He has a really unique background and experience of what's going on in business and in ministry. He launched C12 as a chair in San Antonio and scaled that very quickly. And then about 10 years ago became the CEO of C12 globally. Here's what's really cool about that. C12 is now serving over 4,800 members around the world. And in that time frame of the last 10 years has grown the business 300%. So Mike's vision and ability to help us understand what we're about and what God wants to do in and through us for the greater purposes, to me, is the coolest job in the world. And so I'm so thankful that Mike could be here tonight and lead us through this. And Mike, come press us on a little bit, man. Thanks, Dave.
Well, good evening, everybody. It is a joy to be with you. To build a little bit of context, let me tell the best parts first. So I resonate with Dee for being a girl dad. So I'm an unapologetic dad of girls. Girl dads in the room? Okay, so I would say if you're a girl dad, a couple things this means. Like, I've had my toenails painted. I've worn a tutu. I've worn a tiara. I can quote more Jane Austen than I'd like to. I can sing along to Frozen. There's just a lot of things that girl dads get exposed to that others don't necessarily experience. It was interesting. I had a delegation of CEOs from Southeast Asia, including the Cardinal of the Catholic Church for Southeast Asia, came to see me a couple years ago in San Antonio. And we spent a whole day talking about business as ministry and things that could do in Asia. We've got a presence in Malaysia, Singapore, and Taiwan right now. And had a day together, had enough time together. You know when you've been with someone, you can finally start getting a little sarcastic. So for Craig, that takes about 5 minutes. For me, it took a couple hours. But enough so when we had a break, went back to my office, and the cardinal came into my office. He saw a big family picture, and he went, "Oh, you're a dad of girls. What a blessed man you must be." And I, being a little cheeky, I said, "Well, with all due respect, you have no kids. You've never been married. How would you know?" And he was like, okay, fair. But I still have a good basis by which to say this, Mike. And he said, why? And he said, because I live in Malaysia, where it's been dominated by Chinese culture, where for 50 years they've had a one-child policy, where they basically encourage abortion of anybody other than your first child, and predominantly your female children. You want to have a son, so they can go create a business and create wealth. And so girls were en masse aborted. He said, so 50 years later, we have a lot of men, we don't have a lot of women. We also have a lot of aging parents who only had a son. And here's what we've come to realize. Those rebels who had girls, the girls come back and take much better care of you when you're old than the boys do. And so we now have a saying, those who have girls, they will be blessed in their old age. And I said, you're right, I will be very well taken care of. These two girls will mother me very well whenever Jackie's not around. Married Jackie about 24 years ago, here in a few weeks from now. We met up in Chicago. She's a farm girl from Iowa. And I grew up saying the two things I wanted to never, ever do was never live in Texas and never work for a church. So in 2006, I moved to Texas with her. In 2008, I went on staff at the church we were attending. So I found myself going, man, I'm clearly not prophetic. And now my wife and I say, we'll never live in Costa Rica, we'll never win the lottery. So just in case God wants to break us one more time, we're playing his game. Grew up in Alaska, came to know Jesus in 1989, changed everything about my life. And then had this kind of interesting journey with C12. So in 2010, I became a member of C12. I'd never heard of it. I'll tell you guys a little bit more about how that all got started. And as Dee mentioned, so I was meeting with my chair, a guy like Dee, who one day went, man, you love this stuff. You ever thought about doing this? And I said, nope. And he said, would you pray about it? And I was like, I'll pray about it and then I'll tell you no. So I prayed about it and I didn't come back and say yes, but I couldn't say no either. And so I kind of went on a journey, became a chair, took over the region, and then 10 years ago made this decision. So I've had a lot of kind of yes/no decisions with C12 along the way. Any authentic Texans in the room? Okay, then no one will be, this next slide will offend nobody. So that is what growing up, that's what we call the lower 48. That's what Alaskans call the rest of y'all, otherwise known as the continental United States. When I moved to Texas, and I got called all sorts of names being a northerner when I moved down there, I found it very important to do this geography lesson for them, and that is to transpose Alaska geographically. It only offends Texans, but that's the geographic proportionality of Alaska. Now, it's mostly ice, and there's nobody who lives there, but still, it's a really big national park. I went on a journey, going to a little Christian school that is now shut down, doesn't exist anymore, so no alma mater pride for me, but I found a great wife there. We went through a bunch of different businesses, but along the way, my big wrestling that had me ultimately landed in C12 was I was wrestling with the tension of the fact that I was really good at business. I enjoyed business. I had fun in business. I got a lot of joy out of it, but I felt totally called to want to be about my Father's business and want to make an eternal difference. And I felt like those two things sometimes were symbiotic. Like I love the fact that success in business allowed me to do a lot of giving and philanthropy and volunteering, and I could do a lot of things pro bono for my church and in my community. And so there was a symbiosis dynamic, but they still felt like competing interests in my life. And really what got me into a C12 meeting was when a friend who was the first member of a local forum said, Mike, are you tired of spinning the plates of trying to please God, run a good business, do as much impact as you can? What if those things were to begin to integrate? And I really didn't know what an integration play would look like. And that's what got me to go to a C12 meeting in 2010 and really kind of changed the story from then on out. I was talking to Daryl. So Daryl, this is my AI prompt. So I'm basically wired up to do it. Daryl and I were talking before tonight about we live in such a world where you can do all these different lab tests, right? What's your psychometric, what's your colors, what's your dots, what's your labels. So this is my lab results that if you're a nerd in these kind of things, it basically says I'm wired to be both driven and I've got to scale things and I'm obsessed with details at the same time, which is really frustrating for my team. So I like big picture and small picture, but really there's this underlying kind of pull in my life of wanting to why am I here? What matters? Because at the end of the day, you and I are stewards. We're accountable for God for what do we do with who he's made us to be and why we're here. And so in all my career iterations, I was wrestling with how do I channel this in? And about, 15 years ago, I began laying out some clarity of this bottom statement down here that, hey, regardless of the brand, regardless of the logo on my shirt. Man, I exist to be a catalyst for people to live their destiny. And I want to build stuff that advances the gospel in a sustainable way. And I've done that in for-profit settings, in non-profit settings. But like who I am shouldn't be defined by where I am. If anything, wherever I am should be transformed by who I am in Christ. And it became the journey of trying to wrestle through what does that look like? And when I found C12, I honestly felt like I found this like crazy superstructure that just is like built for this, because it is essentially one giant Ephesians 2:10 enterprise that's trying to help thousands of leaders around the world go, hey, why do you exist? Why does God have you there? And how do you do that? And how do we help each other navigate that? Also comes out, I'm pretty nerdy about intentionality. So my poor children have been raised in a process where we do the same thing as a family. So our family, from the age of 5, my kids could recite, imagine this, my poor children, you got counseling services? Who's the one who has a counseling center? Okay, so if my children call you, understand, by age 5, they're supposed to be able to recite the family mission, vision, values, taglines, and definitions, and C12s. So my kids can recite the company mission, vision, values, doctrine, promise, and strategic anchors. So I think that's normal for kids to do, right? What I love is that my daughter's 15 and there's a boy who likes her, and she's 15. There's no dating happening right now. But what I loved is in some of the early conversations, she's like, I asked him, what's your family's mission, vision, strategy, goals? And he didn't have a good answer. I'm like, yeah, don't waste your time with a boy until he has a good answer, which means I don't have much to worry about for a little while. I should also say, because I'm a dad of 2 daughters, I shamelessly embarrass my girls by saying that means I'm also in the market for any exceptional, extraordinary young men that you'd like to explore contract marriages with. I believe in application. There can be a vetting process. We can have kind of parent to parent. We're also going to go very biblical, do the old school, kind of there's a bride price, so we're going to go back to Old Testament strategies. But I tell my girls I'm going around the country looking for the most exceptional young men who could be worthy of them. So if you think you know somebody, we can discuss it. I share this today because this is really part of why I'm in C12 and part of why I hope you're in C12. If you were in C12 in December, you may have saw a little reference to something. When I turned 30, my wife gave me a gift that has been one of my favorite gifts she's ever given me. And some of you will either love this or you'll think it's really macabre and dark. But when I turned 30, she gave me these 2 cylinders, except for the one on the left was totally empty and the one on the right was totally full. And the one on the right had a blue marble for every week of remaining life expectancy I had. And every Saturday night since then, I end my week by moving a marble from the available column, actuarially speaking, to the spent column. And I let that little clink sound every Saturday night be a moment, have a miniature kind of bema seat moment with me and God, reflecting on the week, saying, what did I do this week that will matter? That 5 years from now, 10 years from now, or at the bema seat, will Jesus actually say, well done, that mattered, that was for me. That won't get burned up. And candidly, you and I both know, we spend a lot of our weeks stressed about things that don't matter a month later, a year later, a decade later. I've built businesses that don't exist. I've solved problems that got erased by other things. Like there's so many things we live in that still require attention. But it's super easy to get to the end of a decade or an era and go, what did I do? What really mattered? And my goal is to use these weekly rhythms to basically have 52 micro pivots a year to reevaluate and say, hey, there's some weeks where I'm like, that was a great week, God. I think Tuesday and that conversation here and the work we did here, this was a good week. And there's other weeks where you're like, that was just a week. It was blurry, survived it. Let's not do that again. And I get a chance to pivot, to rebound. So it's not a loathing thing. It's not a condemnation thing. But I think at the end of the day, you and I will have the greatest accountability before God, not for our not our tax deductible receipts, though I'm all about wild generosity. And I think we should all give as much as we can, but I think God's actually loaded. I think God has all the money in the world. I don't think there's a single kingdom project that is being suspended waiting for your liquidity event to make it happen. I think it's our joy to get to participate in spending our allowance money back on our Father who gave it to us to begin with. But I think we will all be accountable for the time He uniquely gave us in the position He uniquely placed us and what we did with it. And I think that's the greatest stewardship question to go, are we using this well? And I hope your time in C12 is helping you have more joyful marble spends and fewer regrets. In fact, I had I was a chair like D, like John. Where's John at? Okay, so I was a new chair. It's nerve-wracking getting your first forum of people together, getting people to join, be part of this weird thing. What is C12? And trying to feel it out. I had a prospective member join, the table for the day. He was checking C12 out. Huge company, $115 million distribution company. We get to the end of the day, and I'm like, hey, so would you kind of like to join? What are you thinking? And he goes, well, can I ask the group a question? And I go, yeah, ask whatever you want. And he asked like the worst question. Like I thought basically he was killing my C12 practice. He said, how do you guys justify the expense of C12? I mean, this is not a cheap program. And they're like, yeah. And he's like, so how do you justify it? He said, it's like an $80,000, $90,000 decision. And the guy's like, well, Mike, what are you charging this guy? Like, we don't pay that much. And he said, no, it's not the fee. It's the time away from the business. It's the time in relationship. Like, it's a big commitment. It's 12 days away from the business. It's one-on-ones. It's relationship time. And he asked them, like, what's the ROI been? And they went around the table and they each tried to answer good ROI questions. Hey, C12 helped me do this better. I improved my sales. I got better at this. Saved me from making a really dumb decision. I navigated this tough legal situation. Man, helped me with personnel. Like, they all went around and named stuff. But it wasn't moving him. And he got all around the table, and Bill Cox runs this manufacturing company, and he looked at the CEO and he went, I can give you a bunch of answers, but I don't think they'll be adequately satisfactory, and I think you're asking the wrong question. He said, what do you mean? He said, I think the bigger question is, what's the risk of building your whole career, building a great business? At some point, we're all going to exit. We're all going to transition out, transitioning that business, and then one day standing before God and him going, meh, not bad. You didn't do anything bad. But man, there's so much more for you. You never touched what I put you there for. He's like, how much will the cost of that regret be to get to the end of your life and look back and go, I missed it. I missed the whole point. And he said, the guy's name is Bob. He's like, Bob, I'm not perfect. My business could be better. I've got a lot of advice, but I'd say my anxiety gap of standing for Jesus with regret shrinks year after year after year. Like, I feel like I'm more and more and more on mission stewarding the business God's given me. And I'd ask you, what's that worth to you? And I think that's the greatest stewardship question we've got to answer is, are we being faithful with what God's given us, where he's put us for his agenda? So that's why we're here. I lead a little small business. So C12 is a for-profit business that was started in 1992. Our headquarters is down in San Antonio. I've got about 39 employees. In fact, one of my favorite team members, my favorite team member in the state of Arkansas today is right here, Craig Warner. He actually resides in Nashville. So we got 39 employees who get to support about 243 chairs, like John and like Dee, around the world today. And this month we'll have about 4,850-something people as members will be around tables, plus a couple hundred guests in about 9 countries. Our first official members in Toronto will happen this month. So Canada's just coming on board. C12 members employ around 1 million people who go to work every day for peer organizations around the country, around the world. And every week through our businesses, as we're doing work with vendors and suppliers and people who sell to us, we're interacting with about 30 million people every month around the world. So we call it Kingdom Torque, a little business trying to impact 30 million people every month through businesses and leaders like you. And I love the fact we're focusing on the business itself being a ministry. One of the great temptations as Christian leaders is to sometimes look past our organization to the world and miss the ministry right in front of us, miss the city we're in. I was just talking to a home builder from South Carolina 3 weeks ago. He said, Mike, when I joined C12, he's like, I already was a great Christian. I was already given tons of money. I was super involved in my church. He ran mission projects in Haiti. He did wells in Africa. He was extremely generous. He's like, I had a family foundation. He said, I literally had never looked at my 2,000 employees as my ministry. I actually had never looked at my city as my ministry. I built good homes. I created good jobs. And I put all my attention, all my excitement to what I was doing in other continents, which is awesome. Don't stop doing that. But he said, I never even realized this amazing ministry field I had right in front of me, and what kind of culture was I creating? What kind of business was I creating? Even a guy like Tim Tebow, which has a $100 million portfolio of organizations, would say C12 is what's helped him actually view the way they run their business as a ministry, not just the incredible missions they're doing around the world. So he's got 5 key players in, he's got a CEO in, and he's one of our biggest referral sources. He's just telling people all day long, like, man, it is so easy to do great things with your money and not realize how you're making your money matters. So we could help that. I was having dinner with Craig Rochelle in October with a bunch of C12 members, and he went around, he's asking everyone to explain, what is this business as a ministry idea? And they went around the table and each explained it in their own language. I got down and he shook his head and he went, this might be the single biggest issue the church needs to understand today. He's like, I can't believe how little we think about this business as a ministry concept. So we're trying to change that together. We're trying to change that narrative in a real way. Now, another reason why I'm in C12, and then I'm going to jump in and share about like where we're going and share some vision stuff. And the goal tonight is I want to share with you what you're part of, where we're going. And I want to challenge you, like, what does that mean for you here in Little Rock, Northwest Arkansas, wherever you're driving in from, to think about what this might look like for your business and for your part of it. But I'm enough of an old Baptist that I'm going to share this data here. This is 2015 data about the reason people died in America that year. So millions of people die all the time. This is the number. These are the reasons people die. We spend billions of dollars trying to change this data over here. But the reality is, no matter what we do, we will all one day die. We have a pretty high terminal rate. There's plenty of people who died of these labels, and then it was their graduation event to Jesus. Like sometimes that's just the final event that led you into glory, and it's fantastic. Most tragic number up here is that in 2015, about 1.83 million Americans likely died not knowing Jesus. I think that's way worse than improving cancer or heart disease, even though I think those things should get better too. Now, here's what's also sad. We spend billions of dollars on this stuff. As of 2022, we have actually lowered the rate of people dying of most of these diseases. Except for things like despair, tragically, diabetes, because let's be honest, we like our tacos and we like our barbecue a little too much, and we like our sweet tea, so we're going to keep driving that one up. And we're reckless. But most of the things that are purely pathological, we're actually getting better extending life. But sadly, the one area we did not gain ground on since 2022 is the percentage of people dying not knowing Jesus in our own country. So that bothers me. So part of my agenda for C12 is I want to change these demographics at a global level, at a national level, at a city level. And I actually think businesses are one of the most potent frontiers and vehicles for that. I'm also in C12 because it works. So these are stats from peers like you last year. About 3,400 members participated in our summer survey on like, hey, how's C12 impacting you? And these things are actually getting better generally over time. It's changing marriages, it's changing businesses. I'm hoping we can redeem the brand of Christian business. Apart from Chick-fil-A and Hobby Lobby, a lot of places you go around the country, Christian business is not the label that makes people go, ooh, that must be the best business of its kind. Sometimes Christian business can mean, bless your heart, I'm sure they're really sweet, but I really need a great doctor. I really need a good electrician. I really need and I think Christian should be a brand of excellence and expectation. And so part of our shadow mission is to go, can we run such great businesses that we actually elevate the brand of Christ in the marketplace and associate it with best in class, best practices. And so you are all part of that journey. So I want to tell you a little story for context. This will explain where our vision's going, but I think it's important to know where it came from, because this good-looking man right here is the guy who founded C12 in 1992. Dee, we're talking about, I was thanking Kim for being supportive of Dee doing a startup a few years ago. They didn't really, I'm sure your 10-year plan before that was not that you guys would wrap up the successful engineering firm, exit, and then go to a whole new startup in an unrelated field. That probably was not in your cards, right? Similarly, Buck Jacobs had led a chemical company in Chicago. They'd scaled it, sold it. From his exit successfully, he'd gone and actually started a golf ministry. I mean, what a way to retire. He went down to Florida and led a golf ministry, ministering to executives through golf. That's called suffering for Jesus. Helped plant a church, was just coasting, involved in all kinds of ministry stuff. That's not fair. Involved in ministry stuff, but had a comfortable life. And in his mid-50s, God called him to start C12. He was not envisioning becoming an entrepreneur in his mid-50s. He wasn't envisioning putting his whole retirement at risk to do something he'd not done. But a bunch of business owners challenged him that there was a need for this. Now, there's always the dilemma of when things are really comfortable, do you take on doing hard things? If you guys have been around me very long or go to conferences, I love this. Whoever first invented this kind of civilizational cycle that hard times generally create strong people, and strong people create good times. The problem is good times in families, in businesses, in nations, in empires, good times tend to create weakness. And then the weakness then births hard times. We see this manifest all around our country, around our world. We see it in our cities. We see it in nonprofits and for-profits and families. And the question becomes, how do you break it? Well, it usually takes someone saying, I'm going to choose to do the hard so we can go create strength. So against his anticipation in his mid-50s, he went all in to start something called the Christian 12 group. Some friends went, could you merge best practice of like a professional peer group for CEOs? Could you have high accountability? Could you have a biblical worldview? Could you incorporate this idea of doing ministry? And instead of being part of 4 groups, could we just have one group that merges all those things together? And Buck, we think you could do it. So he started the thing in Southwest Florida, kind of between Bradenton and Tampa, if you know the Florida area. That's where it got started. His question was, okay, if I do this entrepreneurial venture, how do I know it'll work? Who here has actually started a new business before from scratch? Okay. How many of you have had a bad business? Anybody failed in a business? Okay. Sometimes you got to know when to quit. Like anybody had, like I think all my ideas are great until they're not, right? So his question was, hey, because it's for Jesus, it's going to of course sound great, but what's my accountability? What's my quit switch, fail switch that says, hey, if this doesn't happen, it's not worth it? Because back to the marbles, we're accountable for our time. And so he got his advisors together and he said, okay, we're going to try this for a year, but I'm going to put a 4-part test. And based upon the answer to those 4 tests, at the end of the year, if it's not passing with flying colors, then we're done, pulling the plug on it. So here was his 4-part test. I think business schools should adopt this. This is a pretty great, just simple entrepreneurial test. His question was going to be, okay, I'm going to work really hard all year, but at the end of the year, do people actually want this? Do people come? Question number 1, is there demand for it? Second, will they pay? He's like, I don't want to go into debt. I don't have to raise money. For about 20 years of C12, it was a what profit, for profit, but it was a for profit where there's no fundraising, no donors. Will this thing self-sustain? Third, will they stay? He's like, I don't want to have to be constantly replacing customers. I don't want to be doing something where you're like, bring them in, they leave, bring them in, they leave, bring them in, they leave. Like, I want it to be something that's so valuable people would stay and actually experience transformation and actually build real relationships. And then fourth, he's like, okay, let's say I find something like it is truly meeting a need. People will pay for it, they will stay for it. But people, they go to NBA games, people go to all kinds of stuff. What will make it actually worth it? And his question here was, will there be fruit? Personal fruit, professional fruit, spiritual, will there be enough transformation in the lives of the leaders I serve and the businesses they run that at the end of the year we'd all agree, and this is worth doing. Let's do this again and let's get better. The underlying question was just, is what we're doing worth it? I think it's a great thesis we should all periodically check and go, hey, is this business worth it? What's it accomplishing? Is it worth doing? And if so, then it demands getting better at. So every once in a while, let me go back to these questions. Every once in a while, I like to call Buck Jacobs, who's 87 years old, lives in Atlanta, Georgia, and say, hey, Buck, let's do a test of your thesis again. Let's look through these 4 questions. Let's see, is it still worth doing? Because sometimes things just go through a life cycle, and it was good, but it's no longer good. So are they coming? Will they pay? Will they stay? And is there fruit? I think those are great questions that reassess every few years. So the thing you're a part of, while you've been experiencing it newly here in Arkansas the last 3+ years, has been around since 1992. And here's kind of a 5-by-5 year increment just starting back in the year 2000. The yellow dots are showing you the CEO members who are in forums like you. The gray one is inclusive of key players. And then the black trend line is how many leaders like Dee and like John are making this happen all around the world. And so we're about to have a gathering here in San Antonio in a couple weeks where all the chairs are going to come together for a few days of equipping and training. And our gathering there will have as many chairs as our member conferences used to have back in the early 2000s. So it's a really cool global community. Not only is it more members in places, but it's really just began to go around the world. So from 1992 until 2017, C12 only existed in the United States. We started in Florida, and they were predominantly a Southeast United States organization for many years. For the first 5 years, Buck was the only chair. He was writing the curriculum himself, marketing it himself, facilitating himself, finding people himself, inventing everything himself. Like classic sole proprietor, him and Bonnie figured it out. 1997, got the first couple chairs, began to say, can we replicate this thing? And then began to scale gradually across the United States. And then in 2018, we as a board said, God, are you calling this to really go international? Would this even work? I remember telling the board, I can't even quantify my ignorance about what it would look like to do business as a ministry in other countries. Like, I don't know what I don't know. And so we began testing it. Our first test market was Shanghai, China, then there's Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, then there's Curitiba, Brazil. Again, not what I would have thought. I was thinking probably like Canada, London, somewhere a little simpler, but that's where God raised up leaders. Fast forward to today, and we're in 9 countries. We've actually got about 615 members today outside the United States. So in a little over a dozen cities across Brazil. Fastest growing market in the world is South Africa, both in northern Johannesburg and Cape Town. We just launched in Nairobi in the fall. Launching in Toronto this month. We're in Ukraine. So by the way, it's good to have a pain scale. Little anecdote. My wife was this 2014. She woke me up in the middle of the night, said she had a tummy ache, asked me if I'd go to the store and buy some stomach medicine. I was a really great husband. I said, it's a stomach ache. Can't you just wait till morning, go back to bed? She's not a person who complains. She's like, no, something really hurts. Can you go get some medicine? I'm like, it's 3 a.m. Like, should we go to the hospital? And she's like, no, I just need some medicine. I'm like, listen, if I'm getting up at 3 a.m., I'm like, it's probably a stomach ache. Like, you'll be fine, but I'll take you urgent care before I just go to the store and get medicine. I was just total jerk mode. We go to the hospital, check her in. I'm like, it's probably like a bubble in her stomach, who knows what. Check her in. Well, she has appendicitis and it's about to rupture. And so doctor comes back in. He's like, well, you're having surgery in 45 minutes. And I'm like, oh, so this is a legit stomach ache. That's good. Doctor comes in and he asks, he's like, now, man, when I checked you and asked you how your pain was on a scale of 1 to 10, and you said it was about a 6. Your appendix is about to rupture. Can I ask you why you didn't say 9 or 10? And she's like, well, I had all my kids naturally with no pain meds. He's like, well, that doesn't count. Like, just her pain scale is thrown off, right? So how we judge discomfort is greatly shaped by what kind of pain you've endured in life. And so for my wife, she had a really high pain threshold. Sometimes C12 members will complain about the cookies in the afternoon, or the snacks not being good at their venue, or the chairs were not comfortable enough. If you ever file that complaint in your survey to us, we're going to do a survey in June, and some people will take the time in the survey to complain about, like, I would like nicer snacks in the afternoon. We have a forum meeting in bomb shelters in Kyiv, Ukraine, by candlelight when missiles are striking, and they don't miss a forum. And they will message in about meeting together because power got knocked out, generator got knocked out, but we wanted to finish our forum because we're doing business as a ministry, and this could change our country, this could change Eastern Europe, and stakes are too high, we're not gonna miss this. So whenever I hear someone else complain about, like, my forum venue is not comfortable, I'm like, my sympathy level is really low. So we got a variety of situations. We got people doing C12, the same material you're going through, in Muslim majority countries where it's a federal crime to share the gospel at work, where leading a Muslim to Christ in the workplace results in 5 years of imprisonment and loss of your business. But we got 65 members there. We have a woman, Sharrow, who's led 27 employees to Christ and has alpha courses happening at lunch in her workplace there. And when I asked her, like, how do you find the courage to do that? She said, because my options are either to trust Christ as King of the universe or trust the government. And my vote's with Christ. And so my loyalty lies there. So we sometimes talk about how hard things are in America, but just to get perspective, we got it pretty good over here. But this is the community you're part of. So Buck's question was, would people come? Yes. Would they stay? Yes. We have super high retention. I was just down in the first forum that Buck Jacobs started in 1992 in Bradenton, Florida. 10% of the initial members are still members of that forum. 60%, the companies still are. They're just on their 3rd or 4th CEO since then. So 60% of the first forum is the same companies, but they've gone through multiple rounds of succession. Crazy. Then the question was, is there fruit? And I would say wildly yes. So here's some different ways we think about fruit at a macro level. About 960 C12 companies have workplace chaplaincy. You guys heard about corporate chaplains, one of our partners tonight. Unbelievable the amount. Last year alone, 25,000 Americans alone had the gospel presented to them at work by chaplains at just C12 workplaces. Crazy. 78% of members report implementing ministry in the first year. 68% of our total membership have gone back and revisited their mission, their vision, their core values through a biblical lens. 47% now have generosity programs. The 47% that said yes, we've implemented strategic generosity programs. Those members do about $58 billion worth of sales last year. I'm hoping they've got really high EBITDAs and they do more than just tithe. 28% deliberate discipleship mentorship programs. The average C12 company will see 4 to 6 salvations per worksite per year. Wild rates of marriage transformation. Last year alone, member companies partnered with Pocket Testament League and distributed 179,000 copies of the Gospel of John to customers or vendors and suppliers through their businesses. These are some of the fruit stats that have me telling Buck Jacobs, hey, I think that 4-part test, I think the answer would be yes. I think this thing's got fruit to it. So again, when Buck said, will the C12 thing work? I go, yeah. The question becomes, where do we go with it? So I want to talk for the remaining little time we've got about our vision forward and what the future looks like for us and what that can mean for you and how you think about Little Rock and how you think about Arkansas and how you think about your business, whether it's a nonprofit, a for-profit, whether it's a technical business, a clinical business. Why does God got you in your business? Let's start with this painting. What's this painting? Anybody know the name of it? Starry Night. Who's it by? Anybody know where he was when he painted it? Not when, but where he was. That's not doing like it. Hospital. Psychiatric. He was in a pretty dark place. He was institutionalized, was in a psychiatric hospital, looking out his window, and this is a scene he painted. Now, what's notable about this, in a cool way, but also a really sad way, he's looking at this, and he's beginning to come out of his depression. He's beginning to come out of the dark hole he was in. And the stars and the yellow represented hope. Hope was like the flame was coming back. He's beginning to envision life again. And he put yellow wherever he saw hope shining from. And so you see starry skies, but you also see glowing warm windows throughout the city. What's the only building where he doesn't put yellow shining out? The church. He said, the only place I didn't feel a message of hope that was reaching me in my darkness was the church. And so part of this painting was actually his indictment that he didn't feel like the church was serving him when he was struggling. That's sadly the starry night there. So for him, looking at the stars though, looking out that window, was this invitation to think about what could be, what might be. Now there's another person in the Bible where looking at the stars was part of envisioning the future. Who's someone where God used the stars to tell them it was part of their vision for the future? Abraham. So we have a scene where Abraham was asked to look at the stars. Now there's a couple interesting stories. So poor Abraham was given a really incredible vision by God. But if you remember the story, it didn't happen right away. Even though like Abraham did big things, he moved, his business venture didn't flourish. The vision didn't become real. And so even so God said, hey, like the sands of the shore and like the stars of the sky will be your descendants, he found himself 10 years later having no kids. Going, this doesn't look like stars of the sky, this doesn't look like sand on the beach. And God kept renewing the covenant, saying, remember the promise, remember the promise. And Abraham going, yeah, but I'm seeing no progress. In fact, they had not only gone to a place of promise, but they'd gone through a famine, let's call that a pandemic. They'd gone through economic collapse, they'd had crisis, they had market crashes, they'd had war, they'd had all kinds of things, nothing looking like the dream. And at some point, he still built a big business. If you go look at it from a business lens, he had huge fleets, he had staff, he had herds, he had quite the enterprise, but it wasn't quite the dream yet. And in Genesis 15, it says that God meets him, God's talking to him, and they're having a tent conversation. But God says something unique. God says, hey Abraham, get out of your tent. Leave your tent. Come outside. Kind of an interesting invitation, because like they're having a conversation, they're going back and forth. Why does he need to change his venue? And so I want us to, we're going to dim the lights here, if we can, and I want us to kind of enter this story for a second. So I think it's interesting that 10 years into a journey, 15 years into a journey, it would actually be another 10 years before the dream would actually start to get real, that God came to Abraham and said, come outside. I want you to get out of the tent, because he was just looking at everything. And if you've ever been like stuck in your office trying to figure out a problem, if you've ever been overwhelmed trying to navigate, like make sense of your life, make sense of what you're doing, you can get to where you're just so close to it you can't see it. Like you can't see the forest for the trees kind of thing. And sometimes you need God to like pull you back and give you some altitude and give you some perspective. And so God literally draws Abraham out of the tent and says, leave that, leave the current, and I need you to look up. And I need to reset your imagination. And he has him come out and he says, look up at the stars, look at the bigger story. Like, I made all this, I orchestrated all this, and what I'm going to do through you is as grand as what you're seeing here. I grew up in Alaska, and part of what I love about growing up in Alaska that was really good for me spiritually is it's a state with such grandness of beauty, such majestic vistas, that it's pretty easy to find yourself feeling very small and overwhelmed at the bigness of God. Like, it's really good for my soul to be, whether it's at sea or on a mountain or in the woods, and just see the vastness of creation. And God remind me that I made all this. Like, the God who made all this, the king of this universe, is still in charge and has invited us to do stuff. And for Abraham, he'd gotten cynical and stuck, successfully running a business, but maybe not really believing it had a greater purpose. He was actually doing a pretty great business, but he didn't really know the greater purpose part. And God said, I need to take you out. I need to shake the Etch-a-Sketch. I need to reset things and have you look up and go, don't forget, there's a bigger story you're called to. And he knew sometimes that required leaving the familiar. And I think sometimes the reason why God has you and I end up in a C12 forum somewhere is because, like Abraham, we can mean to honor God. We're trying to be good Christians. We can run a business. But it's pretty easy to lose the plot line. It's pretty easy to lose the thread of why has God got us here. And so I want one of the things you think about tonight, and one of the things I want to invite you to think about the season ahead, is I hope, if you've not already had it, that you have a moment where God kind of draws you out of the tent of your business and asks you to look up at the stars and dream with the Father a little bit about, why does God have you running your business? Why does God have you? It's his business. Why does God have you in that business? What's the greater story he wants to write through you, for you, with you in the business? And we all can get in the tent and get pretty overwhelmed by just the practicalities of things. But we all need the same moment that God gave Abraham in Genesis 15. We can turn the lights back on. Every once in a while, I go through a dreaming exercise. I do it with the board of directors. I do it with my team. I do it personally. I'll get away and do retreats, and I'll just ask God, take me out of the tent. Would you show me what that might look like? Sometimes it's mathematical. So in 2020, anybody remember how great you thought the world was going to be in January 2020? My business plan, my budget for 2020 looked fantastic in January. I had 5 more built by April. But from January and February, it looked amazing. So in January, I rolled out these numbers that, hey, we're gonna shoot towards this stuff. This was outlandish kind of things to pursue at the time. I even, and then a couple years later, I go through an exercise I stole from a friend called a newspaper prophecy, where his exercise is, hey, one way to kind of tease things out is imagine the local business journal, local newspaper, your industry report, whatever you would read, is gonna do a cover story about your business 5 years from now. And you get 3 paragraphs, and you get to author what they would write about you. What would you hope the business story about your company is in 5 years? It's a fun exercise. Sit and kind of dream and tinker and draft it. And so I was at a retreat, and I went, God, what would that look like for C12? And I wrote this in 2022, aiming it for 2027. So I've got about a year to live into this. But in this one, I said, I hope the Wall Street Journal would write an article that would be titled, A Light from Main Street Stirs Hope for Change. And just like curriculum in C12, I'm going to read it for you. So here's your bedtime story. Well, we've all seen plenty of disruption, upheaval, and uncertainty around the globe. There's a growing light stirring hope for a better world emerging from the realm of business. Despite plenty of headlines we cover on legitimate evil, corruption, abuse, and dysfunction spanning both the public and private sectors in our world, there's a growing movement of people demonstrating a different way of doing life and business that is beginning to change the world one community at a time. Take Javier Santos, a manufacturing CEO from Mexico City, who recently returned from a meeting in Cairo where he was meeting with industrial peers at a summit by C12 Business Forums. Javier was joined by 200 peers from the manufacturing sector for a sharing of best practices meeting on how other business owners were scaling great operations with a shared greater purpose, something they call business as a ministry. Joan Maxwell of Regulator Marines in North Carolina with 300 employees was sharing integration models and impact strategies for an audience of peers from 7 nations and 4 continents, all who are running significant manufacturing operations. These leaders, like the nearly 6,000 peers who gather in these forums around the world every month, are part of a vanguard of business leaders who have flipped the script of surviving global market headwinds to proactively shaping their worlds through business. Now, while secret societies may seem the material of conspiracy theories and fantasy novels, since humble beginnings in 1992 as an experimental venture in Florida, this global cadre of business leaders associated with C12 are changing the very chemistry of cities around the world and stirring hope for real change. Many successful business leaders engage in goodwill initiatives or philanthropy, but this tribe takes things to a whole new level. Employing more than 2 million people directly while impacting over 40 million people every month through these businesses, C12 members are wholesale transforming industries, local economies, and families across geopolitical, industrial, social, and cultural borders. At the recent conference, Current 27 in Washington, D.C., we'll note it's actually in Dallas. We couldn't get the venue in D.C. Thousands of leaders converged for an exchange of best practices and case studies of how diverse leaders across diverse industries were building great businesses for a shared purpose. In Chicago, previously a major metro barreling towards social collapse, they are seeing a renaissance of human flourishing as the collective impact of these kinds of businesses not only bring economic stability, but systemic transformation. Leaders claiming loyalty and submission to the teachings of Jesus are unleashing a radical wave of compassion, a commitment to developing people, fair trade, virtuous finance, and generosity that is changing lives. Divorce, suicide, violence, even poverty rates in the metro area have taken a significant drop as the unlikely byproduct of these businesses operating like community pillars and ambassadors for a totally different kind of life. Business schools are seeing a new surge of students inspired by the idea of entrepreneurship and business as a pathway to change the world. Dr. Tony Evans shared opening remarks at Current 27 observed that this collection of business leaders epitomized the kind of kingdom stewards and leaders Jesus was calling the church to release. Now, we don't have C12 Mexico City or Cairo yet, but that's the kind of story I hope would be written in 2027. I don't know what it should be. I don't know what the one in 2030 will be. It's a fun exercise to think about what's your business going to be and what would the story be written. How do we get out of the tent and think about a bigger dream for where we're going and why? So the way we go through it, if you guys have been in C12, last September we did strategic planning with an emphasis on identity-based planning. How does your mission, vision, values help refine what you say yes to, what you say no to, and how you do it? If you were in C12 the year before that, we did long-term planning. How do you look 5 years out? So what I like to do, and we apply C12. I'm a C12 member in Austin, Texas. I've got 2 key players. We eat our own dog food. We drink our own champagne. We try this stuff. We start with, God, where are you calling us to be 5 years from now? And we don't know how, but we start putting key things in. Is there places we need to be? Is there a size we need to be? Is there attributes we need to have? Are there competencies we need to have? And so we spend time really wrestling and discerning in light of our mission, vision, values, and knowing who we are, where are you calling us to go? And we don't get hung up on the how we're going to do that yet. We let that create the tension of the pole and then back into, well, what are the kind of things we'd have to build? And when would we have to start developing that? And how would we go experiment on that? And actually, we realize we got work we got to do tomorrow if we're going to be there in 5 years. Like, actually starts putting headlights down the road for us of where we're going. So if you guys were in C12 at that time, we use worksheets like this, where you literally start mapping out future orientation, deployment schedules, experimentation, and then what are the R&D stuff we got to be doing now, in addition to just run the business stuff. And so we've been going through this process since really last May. We spent about a year resetting our next 5-year vision. And so you guys are actually the first humans outside of my office to see this. And so Dee asked me to present this tonight, and I swore him and John McFessel to absolute secrecy, because we're showing this to the whole rest of the organization in about 2 weeks. So I need you guys to be super wowed in 2 weeks when this comes out. But these are some of the highlights of where we're trying to take the organization, the community you're a part of. Again, we're a for-profit, so I'm not here. This is not setting up for a donor ask. I'm not raising money. I just want you to know there's a bigger story. You gather every month in a forum in Little Rock or Northwest Arkansas or Conway or wherever you're gathering at, and it's easy to not realize, like, there's 570 forums happening every month somewhere around the world that are on a similar journey with you. And so some of the highlights we feel God's calling us to build and prepare this thing for is by 2030 to see C12 forums active in 200 cities around the world, to be active in 35 different international markets, to 500. So you guys see the stats on disengagement at work? So millions and millions and millions and millions of Americans go to work every day disengaged, not liking their job, not flourishing at work. C12 member companies, do you know that the typical C12 company has twice the employee engagement of the American workforce? One of the things I think we give a gift to a flourishing society is by helping create humans that are fully alive at work. So if we achieve these membership numbers, that's 500,000 more people who will experience engagement at work than would have otherwise. That's the differential gain there. That's basically creating high engagement for people. We'd have 10,000 total members. There'd be 50,000 people if we don't get any better than we are today. There'd be 50,000 people every year experiencing the gospel presented to them at work. We'd see 2,000 companies with chaplaincy. We'd be on 6 continents. Right now, members give around $450 million of ministry funding every year through their businesses. So our community began doing about $1 billion of giving every year. It's going to require a different organization. This requires different staffing and systems and structures. And so this begins to back into all kinds of stuff. So we're still working our way back down that. If that's where we're going, what does that look like? So we're going, okay, for our chairs, what are some things we got to build for them? What are capabilities we got to build up? What are things we got to hone and develop for our product mix and our brand? And we're looking through our talent map and what roles will emerge. And so we start backing all kinds of stuff, just like you would have to as you scale a business. This would be crazy, but this is what then forces innovation and thinking differently. Do you guys know the story about how JFK said, we're going to put a man on the moon? Do you remember how long he gave NASA to figure it out? By the end of the decade. How much time was that? Anybody remember? He said so it was about 7 years. So about 7 years, figure it out, right? Crazy. And they did it, right? 1969, put a man on the moon. Do you know that NASA did a retro review and said, well, it seemed crazy. Well, it was only because he put a stake in the ground and said, figure it out, do it by the end of the decade. If he had said do it by 1967, they would have done it by 1967. That they could have shaved 3 years off because they actually project planned, they reversed the plan from the date he gave. But if they just actually done what's the quickest we possibly could have done, they could have done it 3 years faster. Sometimes you just need like a crazy, big, holy, audacious goal out there that says, what's it going to take to go there, and how do we do this? My hope is that somewhere in this process, we actually start changing the narrative of how people talk about business and career and ministry, that the stuff you guys are doing in your forums, you're doing in your cities, actually becomes more and more normative. And that I'm hoping our kids grow up with this being the normal expectation of how are you going to change the world through your daughter's going to be a vet. How's she going to be an ambassador for Christ through veterinary science? Or my daughter wants to be an engineer. How's she going to change the world as an engineer? I hope we'd have a redeemed kind of theology of vocation because the wake of this many leaders leading and living this way. And here's where it begins to get true here. So you guys live in Little Rock. I pulled some math. Crazy weird thing. I live in San Antonio right now, a city of about 2.5 million people. San Antonio is less than 10% churched. And that's pretty common in cities. But when I say that, that's not less than 10% of people fill out a survey saying they're Christian. But in Texas, like Little Rock, you got a Bible Belt syndrome. So everyone's Christian, but they just don't love Jesus or read the Bible. And so there's a difference between apparently being, like in Texas, they confuse being Christian with being Texan, American, or conservative. Those are all kind of like synonymous labels. And so you have to help people realize, like, but do you actually know Jesus? And the reason I say 90% unchurched is if you were to take every church in San Antonio, Texas, and have it at seating room or standing room only, maximum occupancy for 2 services every Sunday, you can only seat about 9% of our population. So I'm pretty sure that while 70% of our city checks the Christian box on a census, they don't go to church. And half the ones who go to church still don't love Jesus or read the Bible. So this is the stat, and I've been part of all kinds of projects trying to say, how do we get the city to come to church? How do we reach our city? How do we reach our city? We've done campaigns and concerts and conferences and rallies, and again, how do you get the city to show up at church on a Sunday? And we've done a decent job at times, but it's not really moving the needle. I was in C12 when I suddenly began to realize this, and this is why C12 stole my heart. I went, what if the issue is not how do I get the whole city to come to church, but how to get the church to show up in the city? And I began to realize statistics very similar to yours. There's in greater MSA of Little Rock, you got about 780,000 people, give or take. About 394,000 of those adults go to work every day somewhere in Little Rock. That's the employed adult population for your city. There's about 2,600 employers that actually have payroll. So I'm a math guy, so I like to slice down, like there's tons of businesses, LLCs, but I'm looking for ones that have payroll and employ people. That's 2,600. Barna and Pew believe that in the greater MSA, there's somewhere between 430 and 700 of those businesses are actually led by or owned by a Christian, a follower of Jesus. This group here actually could reach this much of the city every day. In fact, has a greater reach of non-church people than any church ever will. So the question becomes not how do I, and now here's also a little weird phenomenon to me. There's about 1,200 churches in Little Rock, give or take. The seating capacity is such that actually and attendance is somewhere around 20% of the city attends. The churches in the city could handle 50% attendance. Actually one of the highest seating capacities of any city I've looked at, and actually is one of the highest church attendance. You guys also have some of the highest rates of divorce, highest rates of crime, highest rates of obesity, highest rates of poverty, highest rates of foster care. I mean, the former headquarters of Family Life has 67% higher divorce rates than the rest of the country. So we don't have a problem getting people to show up at church. We need something actually transforming the rest of the week, the rest of their lives. And so I think the big question is how do we actually begin to collectively change the city through the organizations we lead and the work we're doing together? So God had to take Abraham in Genesis 15 and say, hey, leave your business, take a day away, and look at the bigger picture. Hopefully you're going to see C12 get better and better. Hopefully you're going to see better tools and better technology, and we'll add out gizmos and gadgets, and we'll hopefully keep creating good content and things that help serve you well, and wherever we can get better at that, we want to hear. And I hope we create value by creating a bigger community where you can find other people like you doing similar things, and you can share best practices and go build great stuff. But at the end of the day, Dee said it before, our mission is to equip you to build really great businesses and do it for greater purpose. Our vision is to want to change the world by advancing the gospel in the marketplace. And so really what I hope we do is that through the monthly forums that John and Dee facilitate, that each one of those meetings is a time where God kind of pulls you out of the tent of the chaos of your business and says, can we look back up at the stars and think about what's the story here? What are we doing? Why are we doing this? What's the reason God's got you and I in business together? You uniquely get to impact people in so many different domains. Your Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, your reach are people who are, maybe they visit a church. The average person who does say, I go to church, spends less than 78 hours a year in a church. But they spend a couple thousand hours with you. So we've got disproportionate chances to shape lives and shape societies. We think about these different communities we have. I love to steal from a church missiologist, Will Mancini, has a term he calls the kingdom concept. And he challenges a church to think this way, nonprofits to think this way, but I love to apply it in business. I think if we each can go look at what's my reality, what's brokenness around me? whether it's for your team, your industry, the city, the neighborhood you're in. Like, what's the brokenness in the city around you? Can we look at what's our collective potential? What do you got? What's your loaves and fishes? You got money, you got warehouses, you got staff, you got influence, you got relationships. Like, what's the loaves and fishes God's given you through your business? What's the levers you have to influence change on people and society? And then where's God given you a burden? Yeah, everybody can't do everything. You can't do all the things. But if we all do the thing God's uniquely made us to do, that can begin to change everything. And if we can begin to press in as a community of business leaders to say, God, why have you got me here? How do I play my part in this? That begins to change worlds. I'll share with you guys a link after this evening if you guys want to go dive deeper into this. But I've done a lot of thinking as you look through the Bible at the way God describes kings and queens, leaders of the Old Testament era. And they were usually judged at the end of their career, whether they were a good king or a bad king. But really there's kind of three types of kings. They would say there was wicked kings. They'd led people in idolatry. They were abusive. They were corrupt. They were bad people. That's pretty easy. But then most of the other kings were just okay kings, where they would say, well, they did not worship idols like their grandpa did. They did not personally do bad stuff, but they didn't stop the evil around them either. They just had personal piety. They didn't go change the world. And then there was very few great kings where it would say they so loved God that they manifested that by going and tearing down high places and addressing brokenness in systems that were corrupt or hurting people or not aligned with God's way. And they made the whole city experience goodness and peace and flourishing. And I think you and I are the kings and queens of our era. You've got domain and dominion over your business, your world, and you get to ask, like, where are there high places in how we sell and market and promote products and make stuff and how we hire and fire and treat people and how we manage our financial responsibilities and relationships and our culture we're creating. How do I tear down high places there? And where do I promote goodness and excellence and biblical truth? This is the invitation we have through business. This is what our cities need. This is what our world needs, is leaders like you and I to actually embrace all these pieces. You've heard this in January curriculum, this big idea of business as ministry, and those of you who are spouses going, what in the world is my spouse a part of? The big idea we're trying to operationalize every month is this idea that God actually cares about the business you lead. The actual widget you make, the service you provide, the business itself matters to God. But he cares about why you and I do it. The motive matters. You can do good things for selfish motives, and it doesn't matter. He cares about how we do it. The way we do it should be in a way that's biblical and God-honoring. He cares about who we're becoming. I always tell people, like, I'm accountable for being a husband to Jackie, a father to my girls, a son of God, and he cares about the fruit of the Spirit in my life, not just the things I'm able to help accomplish. And then he cares about what in the world is the impact of our life and leadership. What I'm reminding our organization, what I'm going to tell Dee and John when they're in San Antonio in a few weeks, I'm going to tell them this. I'm going to say, as we go about our daily work, let's not forget the bigger story we're a part of. Let's not forget the reason God's called us into this. Let's not forget the commissioning, and that this is by his power for his glory. And it's so much more than just running a business. And so I hope we're going to go outside. We're going to enjoy fun times tonight, relationship. Tomorrow we'll have a forum here. I pray as we gather that God is regularly drawing us out of our tents to go, what's the biggest story for us? I've shared a little bit about where C12 came from, a little bit about where we're going, but you don't need to know our numbers. I want this to change your numbers. I want to really, more than that, I want to change the story you celebrate walking into through the businesses you're leading. Abraham needed it. I think we need it. So with that, I'm going to invite Dee back up to help us transition from this to a fun time of relationship and celebration. But I just want to thank you for trusting C12 with getting to serve you and your businesses. I want to thank you for saying yes to Dee or to John to something crazy like going to a C12 meeting. And I pray when I come back years from now, we get to hear incredible stories of what God has done.
Thank you,
So
Mike.
thank you.
That's awesome. Great job.